Hello, you've tuned into State of South Asia, a podcast from Himal South Asian, where we have the best minds on the region to unpack crucial issues affecting our politics, cultures, environments, and societies. I'm your host, Nayantara Narayanan, coming to you from Bangalore. In this episode, we talk about the death of Mukesh Chandrakar, an independent journalist in Bijapur district in India's Chhattisgarh state. Mukesh went missing on the 1st of January, and 2 days later, his body was found in a septic tank, bearing signs that he had been brutally killed. Investigations into the case indicate that his murder is linked to his reporting about corruption in a road construction project. A few days earlier, a national news channel had carried Mukesh's report about the project. The main accused in the case is the project contractor, who also happens to be Mukesh's cousin. This isn't the first time that a journalist in India has been killed for doing their work. In 2011, Jyotirmoy De, a crimes and investigations editor for a newspaper in Mumbai who had written extensively on the city's underworld, was shot dead by armed men on a motorcycle. In 2016, Rajdeo Ranjan, a journalist in Siwan district in Bihar, was gunned down by assailants on motorcycles. Over the years, despite calls by media bodies for better protections, the risks for media workers have not reduced. In fact, they have only increased in many scenarios. For journalists like Mukesh Chandrakar and Rajdeo Ranjan, who work in small towns and districts far away from cities like Delhi and Mumbai, where all the big news companies are based, the risks are amplified. Priyanka Dubey, the journalist who reported on Ranjan's murder in 2016 and who has been keeping an eye on similar cases and on threats to journalists, joins me today. Priyanka will tell us about what she found out about the precarities of journalism in India's hinterlands. Priyanka, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me in.
And Priyanka, you are right now in a small place in Himachal Pradesh, is that right?
Yes, I am. I'm joining you from a remote village, Himalayan village.
Lovely. Before we get into the discussion, a quick reminder to our listeners to go to our website, himalmag.com, and click Support Himal, and to become a paying patron of the magazine to help us bring you more podcasts like this one. On to our discussion for the week. In 2016, Priyanka, you had reported on the murder of a journalist, and since then you have followed cases of attacks and repression of media workers. What were your first thoughts when you read about Mukesh Chandrakar's death and about his life and work before that?
I was shocked and in despair, and I also felt enraged, very angry, especially because how he was murdered. The murder was so gruesome, and just right after New Year's, the way his body was found, and when the postmortem happened, it revealed very gruesome details that he was brutally tortured, his body parts and bones were broken, and it was terrible. I could like sort of imagine the hate that of his killer with which this young man was killed. So I was absolutely enraged, and I felt genuinely saying this from my heart because I have reported and I'm very connected to the life of reporters, small town reporters, and because I feel that they are the real soldiers. They are the first line of ground information, and people like Mukesh are so rare. I've watched his videos earlier also because I follow Bastar closely and I knew about him. But after his death, I went back on internet and found and read about him more, saw some of his clips and the passion with which he was doing his piece to cameras. It was so raw. There was passion in him. Just like something which. Obviously is because of his age, but also because of how he felt towards this profession, and more than the profession, towards the people of Bastar. His connect to the place he was reporting on, Bastar, was so evident. Either you are a people's person or you are not a people's person. So Mukesh was a people's person, truly. He was at ease among the people of Bastar. They were his own people. He was talking about them. He was connected to each and every small detail that he was talking about, be it a road or the situation of sanitation, floods, etc. Everyday issues he was raising. It was almost sort of a tragic novel opening up in front of you, the end that this man had. It broke my heart into pieces. So I felt that nothing has changed in so many years. It took me back to so many memories, and it took me back to my conversations with so many other of the small town reporters. I do not like calling them stringers. I call them local reporters, my local friends. It took me back to my memories of conversations that I had about the safety and the circumstances of which a local reporter faces while working on the ground. obviously I kept following because I really want the perpetrators, to be held accountable, and the courts to sort of ensure the Mukesh receives the justice.
Right. And we'll talk a little bit more about the circumstances under which Mukesh worked, both as a small time journalist and in Bastar. We'll also talk about the safety of, again, reporters in non metro cities in India in general and their conditions of work. But I want to start this conversation by talking about the story that you reported in 2016 for the magazine The Caravan. That was about the killing of Rajdev Ranjan, who was at the time the bureau chief of Siwan district in Bihar for a Hindi daily called Hindustan. You went to Siwan shortly after he was killed to see what you could find out about the case. In this story, in fact, you lay out very clearly that you didn't have those answers, but you came back with a lot more about the state of journalism in districts like Siwan. So tell us what you found out about Rajdev Ranjan's work as a journalist and how it was more complicated than journalists who have straightforward jobs in the big cities of India.
Yes, that was a remarkable story, I remember. And I think the most important, the most striking part aspect of that story was that it was very nuanced. There was no one dimension or one picture or one line of thought. I will put in front of you one by one the threads that I encountered while reporting on that story. So right after Rajdev Ranjan passed away, there was this whole cacophony in the media and the whole noise, and from Bihar to Delhi, the main headlines that was portrayed Rajdev Ranjan as the warrior of pen and a brave journalist who was killed because of his work. He was brutally killed. He was a man of habit, as the story starts. The first line is Rajdev Ranjan was a man of habit. So according, like, he has sort of a routine, and he used to, by this time he'll work, this time he'll drive back home. So he was driving back home like always after his finishing off his work at the Hindustan's bureau office in Sivan, and right, like, not more than 1 kilometer he was able to drive, and then some motorcycle born assailants shot three bullets. One was found in his liver, one was in his neck, and I remember one was right between his eyebrows. So it was a very brutal death, and it was a sensational event. It like shook at least the media corridors up till Delhi, and the case was in news for a couple of days after that. The whole narrative was going on that this man has been killed because of reporting on Shahabuddin. Shahabuddin is this mafia turned politician, this mafia don, very infamous for his all kind of murky links with real estate, with business, with crime, with politics, and elected Lok Sabha member. And I think is been in prison for a long time, in and out of jail, on bail, then bail rejected. So the first line of information and the first line of media impression that came out was that he was killed because of his reporting around Shahabuddin. But when I went there and when I reported, like, it was sort of a classic example of what is happening in the small town India with journalism. So what I eventually found out was that every local journalist in small towns like Sivan is expected to bring revenues for the newspaper he or she is reporting for. And like, there is a monthly target. For example, when I reported this story, it was in 2016. The monthly target was 1 lakh rupees. You have to bring 1 lakh rupees worth of advertisement for the organization that you are working on. And when you bring that advertisement, 15% is the commission cut that you get, and plus your meager salary, which is very little. In 2016, as the bureau chief on role, a paid person, like, who was on the payroll of Hindustan, Rajdev Ranjan used to earn not more than 20,000. His salary was a little less than 20,000, which he used to supplement with that 15% commission which he used to get. Now here the whole thing sort of becomes murky when you, as a institutional practice, part of the institutional structure, as a part of operation, when you are mandatorily forced to sort of bring a certain amount of money for your organization, then you are bound to compromise on your reporting, because where are you going to sort of generate that money from? In places like Sivan, I found out that the main, it is a very small town, like underdeveloped and one of the poorest districts of India. So the main sources towards which a journalist can turn to generate revenue for his or her newspaper is the construction sites and school institutions and politicians, etc. These are the main sources. So That means real estate business or other kinds of business, and number two, politicians. So Rajdev Ranjan used to dive into both these avenues to generate money. He was very close to Om Prakash Yadav, who was then sitting an elected member of parliament from the area. At that point of time, Om Prakash Yadav's aide, very close associate, which used to name him as a spokesperson, Shrikant Bharti, was also killed and murdered by motorcycle-borne assailants. And Rajdev Ranjan reported on the case, on the murder of Shrikant Bharti, which was back then assumed to be like they were assumed to be the main reason behind his eventual murder. But the story was not that simple. When I went there to report, I got to know, I spoke to a number of stringers there, almost everyone who used to work in Siwan at that point of time. And I spoke to, like, I did hundreds of interviews from Siwan to Patna to Delhi. I also read more than 70 of Rajdev Ranjan's bylines, which were provided to me by his family. And in his reporting and otherwise, I found that almost all organizations were reporting on Shrikant's Bharti murder. So, and he did not, like, there was no scoop as such published by Rajdev under his name, which could validate or sort of make sense of such an escalated response like his murder. But there are many other things. There was, by the end of the story, what came out was the real estate scene in Sivan was booming, and there were two rivals, criminal background people who were diving into real estate, and Rajdev was close to one. So the other had reasons to sort of, the police, this was the line of police investigation, which I was told. So this is quite murky. It's not as simple. And I empathized with Rajdev, especially because to me, he came across as a victim of the larger institutional malice, not only of the media, but also the larger institutional malice, like at the whole system, the whole society in which he was operating.
Right. And just to put that into context, 20,000 Indian rupees is roughly less than 250 US dollars. So that's a very small amount to be drawing as a monthly salary, and which is why journalists find the need to supplement incomes in other ways, which is why newspapers in small towns and in the rural areas ask their journalists, their reporters and editors to also help in finding ad sales as well. But Priyanka, that also, again, something that you point out in the piece, that also changes the reporter's relationship with the people in that space, right? And there might be, in this social context, also possibly justifiably, causes reporters to pull some punches. I mean, they don't want to put out an unflattering story of someone that they're going to ask for money. So, how does that work?
I totally agree with you. I think it's a very difficult situation for anyone to work in, especially as a reporter. When I went there and when I saw what is happening, the first thing that I felt like as a reporter myself, that, oh my God, if I put myself in their shoes, my first reaction would be, I have no dignity, like, because journalism is not a very high paying profession anywhere. But at least in cities, I can pay my rent and I can buy my food. I was able to do that. But my currency as a reporter has always been my integrity, like, which sort of gives me the right to stand up in front of a politician or to walk into a chief minister's room and ask two strong questions. That power comes in me because I am not sold out, because I am writing, I'm honest, and I have some integrity. So when I put myself in their shoes, what I felt was how difficult these people might be feeling. Everybody around in the city knows, the people in power know that they are doing you a favor by helping you with ads. And when you are taking anybody's favor, you cannot answer, you cannot question them back like as strongly as you can when you do not when you are not taking any favor from them. So I was imagining the difficult situation, the plight and the conflict that people like Rajdev Ranjan might be feeling in their hearts and minds. But I spoke to their family also and friends and element. When this guy started, he trained as a lawyer and would work in the mornings as a lawyer, and in the evenings he would like start doubling up as a reporter, working as a reporter in the second half of the day. When he was very young, when he started, there was a spark in him. When he started, he was a young man, he was attracted to newspapers and the world of journalism. But we do not have that sort of infrastructure which can facilitate, encourage good reporting and encourage and facilitate people like Rajdev Ranjan. The system sort of forces them into a place where they are pushed to take favors, and it is the most brutal thing for anyone who even for one day has felt or ever felt like a honest reporter in himself or herself. It is the most, I think it is like walking on fire when you are asked to sort of sell your soul. But once you do it, like as I wrote in the story, eventually the stringers also start making the 15% cut. So once the local reporters, the stringers, they start taking favors from people, all kind of people, educational institutions, politicians, local businesses. I also mentioned a pharmaceutical company which was putting up a plant there, taking favors from all kind of companies, all kind of places. And also I think we as reporters and our organizations, media organizations, are responsible for it, but also a huge part of the responsibility goes out to the people, to the society at large, which always refuses to pay for reporting, and always refuses, they never want to pay. They We as a society do not value what reporting, what good information, what unbiased information can do to you, how it can help you in sustaining your democracy. It all boils down to that, because organizations, media organizations also do not have support. I see every good organization all the time asking for everybody to sort of, like readers especially, to support them, because this is not our habit, which I feel is ironic.
So Rajdev Ranjan was killed in mid 2016, and later that year in November, another journalist, Dharmendra Singh, he was a crime reporter also in Bihar, and he was shot dead, and the attack was thought to be linked to his reporting on illegal stone cutting. The International Federation of Journalists, which releases a report of media workers killed across the world, found that at least 5 Indian journalists had died in targeted killings that year. And the numbers really haven't come down since then. In April last year, Reporters Without Borders published a report showing that at least 28 journalists had been killed in the last 10 years, and at least half of them were working on stories related to the environment, such as investigating illegal mining or real estate lobbies. Targeted killings of journalists aren't restricted to India, of course. The International Federation of Journalists, a report on press freedom in South Asia for the year 2023-24, found that 10 journalists in Bangladesh had died unnatural deaths, with 2 being registered as murders and 3 suspected murders being listed as road accidents. It also said that 4 journalists were killed in Pakistan in the same year. The report also listed various other violations of press freedoms across the region. In an earlier episode of State of South Asia, I spoke to senior journalist Lakshmi Murthy, who was also an editor of the report, on the crisis of journalism across South Asia. Do go back and listen to that if you haven't already heard it. And coming up soon on Himal South Asian, we have a story on the details, the delays, and the obfuscations in the investigation into the murder of Sri Lankan journalist Lasantha Wickramatunge in 2009. The story is part of a series produced by the Free Media Movement, which is a media freedoms watchdog in Sri Lanka, and is being published to mark Black January, which commemorates the intimidation, murder, and enforced disappearances of journalists in the country. As you can see, it takes a lot to bring you in-depth, independent coverage, including important investigations from the whole of South Asia. At Himal, we rely on listeners like you to support our work. This helps us bring you more stories and produce more podcasts like this one. You can become a patron of the magazine by clicking on the link in the episode notes or by going to our website and clicking Support Himal. You can also sign up to our newsletters to keep up with our latest stories, events, and more. You'll see a sign-up link to our newsletters also in the episode notes. Now back to our conversation with Priyanka Dubey. Priyanka, I want to talk a little more about the pressures on journalists who work in non-metro settings. Like you said, they are paid very little. They often have to supplement their incomes in other ways. And it's all very well for, journalists sitting in the metros who are being paid much better to talk about ethics without actually understanding the complexities in which reporters outside the city, journalists outside the cities are operating in. In your conversation, through your reporting, you have met several of these journalists, sometimes while seeking help for stories of your own, sometimes in other contexts. Give us a little more detail on what the pressures on them are.
2 points I have for this. One is language and one is gender. So most of the people who work in small towns and at smaller centers, I have found them to be invariably male, and I have found them to be invariably working in the local language. But the situation of people working in local languages and vernacular languages is worse, and there is a clear demarcation in the financial and social situation and the quality of life and the threats, I mean the security side of it, of local reporters, of reporters working in vernacular languages in small towns and of the reporters working in state capitals or the country capital and working in English. Working in English invariably automatically gives you some sense of security. The irony of the whole thing is not missed on me as I say this, but if you're working in English, you know that if something happens to you, then there are chances that your organization might take this up more seriously. Your the news of what has happened to you will go and travel far away to other countries, and there's a possibility of an international pressure sort of building in. And a local reporter working in a small town in a local language, no such sort of amenities, no such sort of cushions, so to speak. One thing which I really want to flag is that I've seen very few women working in small towns and small centers. I do not remember meeting a female stringer, quote unquote, ever during my reporting life of 13 years. And I've only done reporting in for 13 years and only sort of traveled, reported outside Delhi. I've never reported in capitals. So I have substantial exposure. I am shocked as I sort of make this calculation in my mind, and I'm shocked as I say this to you that I've never met a female. So there is a clear gender bias, a gender valley, not a small divide, but a valley of divide. Like the divide is huge. And these reporters are very good people. I have had beautiful experiences. If I am in a place where there are no hotels or no accommodation, they take me to their homes. They've also made me sleep on the bed of their children because there was only one cooler in the room. So they would sleep, the husband and wife would sleep in the next room, and they accommodated me. I can never forget it, to sleep in the room of their children with their children. And when I walk out of the door, there were grandmothers and other family people who would like say bye, pack me a roti or two, give me 51 rupees, a bit of firana. And like what I'm trying to say essentially, that these are very good people, genuine people, and they will help you without any hesitation. And if you work seriously on the ground, you earn respect. I earned that respect. But the question which always bothers me, troubles me, is that they do not get back anything from the centers. They are not taken care of. We, as media, who talk about equality all the time, raise all the flags and think ourselves as some sort of some higher people, working for, we have sacrificed our lives for the higher good, and other we are important. This self importance creeps in, which is stupid actually. So what I'm trying to essentially say is, we talk so much about equality and all, but the truth is that our own fraternity in the small towns and in sort of also three tier cities and kasbas and villages is facing and living and working under abject discrimination. There is no equality as such. The pay scales are different. There is a language disparity. People working in English get double the salary of the people working in the same organization in the vernacular language sister concern of the same organization.
So the whole organization is leaning on these ground reporters to give them that essential information, right?
Yes. That is something very important. For example, the life of Rajdev Ranjan. This man was working for Hindustan. So Hindustan is a sister concern of Hindustan Times, which is the main English newspaper. So a person who is working for Hindustan would be receiving almost half of the salary for the same position, covering the same geographical area, as compared to the person who is working for Hindustan Times. So there are these all kind of disparities. The life of a local journalist is very difficult. Not just the social and the financial disparity that this person faces as compared to his metro counterparts, but also takes the heat directly on himself. He's directly talking to people on the ground. He's directly talking to people who are involved in all these murky businesses, all these criminals, all these, he is living among them. So if something happens, he's the first one to be wiped out. I'll give you one example, an anecdote. So once I was reporting on women trafficking in India. It was a three-part story. For one part of that story, I traveled to Madhya Pradesh. It is a state in India, and Neemuch, Mandsaur are the two districts in Madhya Pradesh where I went. And with me was a local journalist from Mandsaur. There was some highway side situation which we had to sort of scout and report on. My information was that small little girls who were being trafficked from places like Delhi and Bombay girls who belong to very poor families who do not have so much access, were homeless mostly. They were picked up and they were trafficked via a three-layer trafficking network to places, to this place, Mandsaur Neemuch highway, where they were sold, and like they were forced into prostitution, and they were given all sort of injections and hormones to sort of hasten their physical growth, make them look like 16, 17 at the age of 7, 8, 9. So there was this whole situation which was going on, and sort of to investigate that, I wanted to go there at post midnight. So the local reporter, he was a friend, and I've always developed warm, limited friendships with people I work with. I am very fond of them, and this man told me, because no taxi, no vehicle was ready to go to take me there. So he looked at my face and he said, "Oh, yeah, I'll take my own car, but then it has my number on the car. I'll be, I can be easily traced." But eventually he took us, me and my, I had a photojournalist with me. He took us both in his own car at 2 o'clock in the night, and it was undercover investigation, which sounds unreal now. I was much younger, and I would sort of do things much more carefully now. But it was a great story. It led to impact. It led to the rescue of 35 young children. So everything was worth it. Point I'm trying to put across is that my local journalist friend was at much higher risk, and we were concerned for his safety for at least 3 months after the story was published. And I kept following up and I kept asking him because of the number. We were afraid that somebody might take a photo of the number of his car and will trace him. If something happens, their lives will be destroyed. They have seven generation of families and living there, mother, father, old people, young children going to school. So they are very vulnerable. And like, for example, we saw in the case of Mukesh Chandrakar, how he was very vulnerable.
For him, the risks were amplified because Bastar is one of the most dangerous places in India because it is a site of conflict between the leftist extremist movement of the Naxals and the security forces. Civilians have been quite regularly caught in the crossfire, quite literally, and many of them have been killed. And this is the region in which Mukesh worked. He also found himself in situations where he was an interlocutor between the Naxals and the security forces, even involved in the rescue of some of the security forces.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because especially Bastar is a place which is infested by suspicion from all sides. Who bears the brunt of this suspicion? Local journalists and the local people. Both the security forces are suspicious and the Naxals are suspicious. Everybody, all sides are suspicious of what's going on. So, especially for people like Mukesh, but this man earned a reputation for himself because of his good work. That is all fair and nice, and we can all see that his work is very good. But what about the life security? But who is going to sort of back you if you are in a soup? Who is going to protect you if you're writing stories and reporting against these people who are so powerful, locally at least? You have nobody's back because there is no system of backing reporters in India, no institutionalized system of backing reporters in India. But we need to demand for some structural protection for people who report, institutional protection.
Right. Talking about the lack of that institutional protection, what are the legal protections for journalists in India?
Oh, that's very sad because but journalists do not have any special protection in India. They are protected by the constitution, by the general laws of constitution, which applies to every other Indian citizen. But there is no special provision for any journalist. But there are situations and cases if in which if you are attacked and if you are threatened, then you can go to the police and weighing the whole situation, they might give you X, Y, or Z plus security. But this thing also has happened exceptionally and mostly to people who are influencers or are big editors in Delhi, Bombay, or a big Twitter celebrity. But at least when something happens to them, there are thousands and millions who rally on Twitter, who make noise, and at least the court took some notice. At least there is somebody to speak for you when you are attacked. My heart goes out to all these reporters who bleed to death and who are living in very bad, awful situations, and there is nobody to raise voice for them. We have these two things: press council of India, editors guild. These are organizations that we have, but these are like mostly toothless tigers, paper tigers as I call them.
Priyanka, what do you think that their roles should be, roles of the Press Council and the Editors Guild?
I think they should be given more power, concrete power, which can lead to some crystallized action other than issuing plain and hollow condemnations on paper. They need to do something besides making hollow paper pleas. For that, I think there should be some framework in constitution. We need to sort of raise voice for this, and so that we can push for changes which can give at least Press Council of India, which is the most prime and most important press body in India, more power to sort of, like police organizations, or to sort of ask for investigations, or to make some clauses, at least for registered correspondents, at least for registered people who are working in small towns of India, some sort of protection. But now we do not have any special provision, even for people who are working in conflict areas like Bastar and Kashmir.
There is, of course, the other angle, which is threats from the authorities or the state itself. Journalists have increasingly been arrested for doing their work, sometimes under very stringent laws meant to prevent terrorist activity.
Yeah. UAPA is the new thing in India. Yeah, UAPA. And since it has been diluted and there have been changes, amended, the UAPA Act was amended by the current government.
Yeah. Again, I just want to expand that UAPA is the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which was drawn up to prevent terrorist activity in India. But go on, Priyanka.
It was initially, as you said, it was initially founded or made to prevent terrorist activities, but the current government diluted it, as I say, in the parliament, expanded its ambit, and now it is sort of not necessary for the police to prove anybody's link to sort of a terrorist organization. They just can pick you up like that, and for 2 years they can keep you. This law is very stringent. There are very stringent clause. It is difficult to get out, it is difficult to get bail, and it is very easy now for the state to sort of pick anyone they do not like. And we have recently, from past, I think, 7 8 years, many numerous FIRs on journalists. For example, Supriya Sharma, she's the editor of Scroll, and while Corona, when she was reporting in the Banaras constituency, which is the constituency of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, also the whole thing is available on internet. But I want to mention this anecdote, this story, because it tells that how just general pro people, just very genuine, very non-scandalous, everyday, like good spirited regular reporting can lead you in a soup. So she did a very normal good story. She went to a place and just to find out how is the government helping people during Corona, the supply of ration, etc., if they were given medical assistance, food assistance. She was talking to some people, and then later, after the report, she was there was a FIR filed on her. And the local police station, there was news, people from local police station went to the family she interviewed and sort of forced them, bullied them to give statements against Supriya. Thankfully she had recordings and all, but it is so troublesome. What I'm trying to point out, it will become such a mental harassment for a reporter if for a everyday regular news story there are FIRs filed on you under a very normal natural like scenario. It's just a regular everyday story on how the corona is affecting people. Are they getting any help from the government? But even for that, if you are facing FIRs, you have to go to court. Most organizations in India, news organizations which are not Godi media, they do not have enough to sort of pay their reporters. It is very difficult to manage and run a news organization these days. And over that, if you pile an organization up with 20 legal cases running in 20 different points in the country, and you have to make endless trips and contact lawyers, endure so much mental physical harassment, travel all the time, then how are you supposed to continue work and reporting? This is a trap to stifle whatever little reporting, whatever little honest media is left in India. It is scary.
Right. When we were talking earlier about doing this podcast, you also mentioned the example of Rupesh Kumar Singh. Is that right?
He's a local journalist from Jharkhand. He was picked up and arrested under UAPA. It's been around 2 years now. He has been put up in a jail in Bihar. And recently, I read a piece which was written by his wife in Hindi language, which was published in The Wire. And in that piece, his wife details that for the first time, her son was able to see her father recently. Because during a hearing, she wrote that piece on her visit to the court only. So during that hearing in Patna, her husband was brought in from the Bhagalpur jail. Bhagalpur is a small district in Bihar. He was made to travel all the way from Bhagalpur to Patna. Then the wife and the son went from Jharkhand to Bihar. they went to Patna, and the wife said that I made mushroom for him because he loved mushroom, and she went to the court so that she can give him some mushroom to eat, meet him, make the son meet his father. And they got around 40 minutes at court to meet after 2 years. That was the only meeting in 2 years, and they have no clue how long this ordeal is going to take. What was the fault of this man? He was reporting. My problem with these strict security laws is that they are making the process the punishment. If you have something against somebody, then you prove, you produce the charge sheet, you frame the charges, and let the trial start. You cannot like keep people confined endlessly and turn the process into the punishment, which is actually what is happening. Because Rupesh Kumar is not a Twitter celebrity, because Rupesh Kumar is not a big reporter, big editor, or big Delhi based editor. He could never go to Yale or Columbia or some big English American school. He cannot speak English. He has no influence. He has no power. That is why he is sort of destined to live like this and suffer. That is where the disparity comes. But if in his place there was a very top notch English editor from Delhi, all India would be on Twitter. Everybody would be rallying and trending his name on Twitter, which is good. I'm happy, at least for them you are doing. But we need to expand our circle of empathy. We need to also think about the Rupesh Kumars of our world.
Well, that's a lot of ground we've covered today, Priyanka. We can only hope that it gets better. But finally, I'm going to ask you for 3 recommendations. These can be another book, a movie, another podcast, for people to better understand the threats to journalism in South Asia, or generally about how people have been rising to the challenge of journalism anywhere in the world.
It's a very good question. I like so many books and movies, but if I'm asked to pick three, I think people are more likely to watch movies than read books. So I'll sort of mention movies. There's a old movie. It's the title is New Delhi Times. It's a story of a newspaper editor. It's a beautiful film. It's a classic film in Hindi. I think it's available on YouTube. And then I think people should watch Spotlight and also The Post. And besides that, I think Blood Diamond is a very good film. There's a role of a journalist in this film, which I really like. I love the whole film. It's the film of which can give you a glimpse of the life of a conflict reporter.
Right. And I would recommend that everybody goes back and reads your work, including your book, No Country for Women. Priyanka, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to your whole team.
That was Priyanka Dubey on the State of South Asia podcast. You can read more on journalism in South Asia on our website, himalmag.com, along with reportage and commentary on politics and culture from the region. Follow the Himal South Asian podcast channel on your podcast app to find all our latest episodes, and you can share, rate, and review them. You can also catch up on episodes of the South Asia Review of Books podcast with Shweta Srikanta. Don't forget to sign up to our newsletters to keep up with Himal's work. This episode was edited by Ritika Chauhan. We'll be back soon with another in-depth conversation on the next episode of State of South Asia with me, Nantara Narayanan. Thank you for listening, and see you then.